Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Olena Halushka. She's a co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory and a board member at the Anti-Corruption Action Center at TEC. Welcome, Olena.
Thank you very much. Hello.
You are advocating since months in the West to confiscate Russia's sovereign assets, which have an overall value of over 300 billion US dollar, in order to fund Ukraine's reconstruction and the current needs of Ukraine to purchase weapons. Is there any kind of a precedent of such confiscation in the modern history?
Well, actually, that's one of the reasons why our Western partners are reluctant to move forward with this idea, because they use, that there was no such precedent. There was actually the confiscation of the assets of Iraq once after they attacked Kuwait. But that was the decision of the UN Security Council, which unfortunately is not our case, because Russia, as a part of UN Security Council, is blocking any such decisions. But we also have to understand that the international law has been developing very actively after the World War II, and current Russian aggression is the largest war of attrition after the World War II. And it proves that, unfortunately, the international law is not effective enough to be able to stop and prevent genocides like this. That is why, the international lawyers came up with the ideas and theories how to implement confiscation in order to that it corresponds with the international law fully, meaning that yes, it is doable, it has to be crafted and well thought, but the fact that there wasn't such precedent in the past should not stop us from doing the right things today.
That seems to me as a sort of a interesting dilemma. Like, we can, as the Western countries, we can supply Ukraine with weapons to destroy Russian equipment and to kill Russia's soldiers, but we cannot confiscate the Russian money which Russia uses normally to fund this war, because the money belongs to sovereign state. Isn't it some sort of a very strange balance between what we may do to destroy the property and kill soldiers, and what we may not do, confiscate property?
Well, that's exactly a very good question from my perspective, because that was something what we have been asking our partners back in 2022, when Ukraine was receiving the aid very incrementally. Weapons, a little bit of here, a little bit of there, and you remember that modern battle tanks, Leopard 2 tanks and Abrams, they arrived to Ukraine only after a year and a half since the beginning of the full-scale war. And we were asking our partners very explicitly and straightforward, like, in the protracted war, in the war of attrition, Ukraine would need a lot of money of the support in the long term, sustainable, in order to be able to self-defend and fight this fight. So what is the plan? And nobody seriously treated those questions. And currently we are seeing that the US supplemental aid package worth of $61 billion stuck in Congress and cannot be voted for 7 months already. And we face a very serious dilemma, because without the sustainable aid, which is not linked, which does not depend on the domestic issues, debates, elections in our partner countries, whatever, it would be very complicated for Ukraine to win. And of course, the West is supplying us with very much needed and important weapons. Western partners are applying very strong sanctions, including the price cap, technology sanctions. Some are not implemented properly. The loopholes are not being closed, but the sanctions are unprecedented. And simultaneously, we kind of feel this glass ceiling that the confiscation won't be implemented because of the plenty of different reasons. It's like it shouldn't be this way, because it is either all in support for Ukraine's survival and victory, or if the West continues supporting us with this, incremental aid, a little bit of here and a little bit of there, then unfortunately Ukraine might be doomed to fail this war in the end. And in the NATO strategic concept 2022, which was adopted in Madrid summit, Russia is very directly named as the direct threat to NATO, even before Russia actually attacked NATO. What would mean Ukraine's fall for NATO security, transatlantic security, and European security? That's why in our conversation with the international partners, we called them on not to establish, to set for themselves those red lines, because escalation management unfortunately proved to be absolutely detrimental for the Ukraine's capacity to self-defend and to sustain this fighting. We need all resources for Ukraine's victory as soon as possible. And confiscation is one of such resources, because Western taxpayers continue supporting us. We are extremely grateful for that. But finally, it's the time to make Russia pay.
Absolutely. And from my perspective, we need to confiscate this money, and then Russia may see us at the WTO arbitrage, which doesn't work anyway. So it's up to them to use the legal means to fight our legal decision, and let's see what will be the end. But before we go further into this discussion on the technical details of this possible confiscation, don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to our channel. We are talking to Olena Halushka, who is a co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory and a board member at Anti-Corruption Action Center at TAC. Olena, tell me, we are talking about 300 billion US dollar, a huge sum of money. What kind of assets are inside, and where are they being held?
So we are actually talking about the reserves of the Russian central bank. In total, their reserves before the beginning of the full-scale war were around almost $600 billion. A little less than half of this money were held in G7 countries and other democracies like Australia, for example, or Switzerland. And around $300 billion assets were frozen in those G7 countries. These are actually bonds, securities, and cash that are held either in depositories or in banks or other financial institutions of the Western countries. Most of this money, around $200 billion, are held in one depository, Belgian agency Euroclear. And that's why we are currently advocating for the establishment of G7 plus Belgium confiscation coalition, because G7 decision would be a very important political step, and Belgian participation would have a very practical implication, because that's the country where most of this money is currently held and where it has to be confiscated from. I would also like to briefly comment on the issue that you mentioned about the possibility of the legal trials, because that's absolutely the way how Russia is responding to any announcement of the new form of aid for Ukraine, be it jets, tanks, or whatever. They immediately start blackmailing that, hey, it's going to be much worse, our retaliation would be very painful. Our lawyers studied the different possibilities of Russia applying to different tribunals, UN Court, European Court of Justice, ICC, whatever, and they assess the risks as very low, because in the most cases Russia do not have the jurisdiction to apply there. In some cases the courts actually do not have the jurisdiction to consider cases like that, and so on and so forth. Also, the German lawyer Patrick Heinemann did a legal analysis of the German legal system, and he proves that in case of Germany, for example, Russia also cannot sue in the German national courts because they do not have the fundamental rights within the German legal system, meaning that, yes, Russia might try to sue and they will definitely blackmail and try to scare everybody, but the prospects of winning those cases are extremely low.
That is great what you have described already, that the property which we are talking about is not like some real estate or factories or some patents which need to be sold first to provide this money to Ukraine. And of course, this makes the whole procedure extremely complicated. No, it's not like some yachts of the oligarchs, which we need first to confiscate and then to sell. It is liquid assets which can be immediately transferred to Ukraine, which makes it extremely helpful for Ukraine. But what are the arguments from the side of the depositories or national governments who say, no, we have frozen the assets, but we will not transfer them to Ukraine?
So there are basically three main blocks of arguments against confiscation. First one is legal. As you've said, you know that there were no precedents before, that this money is protected by the sovereign immunity, so we cannot simply take them from Russia and transfer to Ukraine. The second big block is financial arguments and the trust in dollar and euro as the reserve currencies, and that after confiscation is done, the reserves of the third countries will simply flock away from the Western financial system and undermine them. And the third important pillar is so-called retaliation fears, that Russia is blackmailing that they will start confiscating Western businesses or their assets that are located in Russia.
Isn't it some sort of halfway plausible arguments? I believe if some dictator had his or her money in Europe, they should have already transferred the money to another country after the Russian money has been frozen.
You're absolutely right. And that's something what investors also point out to, that the main market shocking event has been already the freezing of the funds, because this is also relatively unprecedented in such large scales. And, you know, when people talk about sovereign immunity, for example, well, you know, absolutely, there is, from the legal perspective, there's absolutely no difference between the freezing and the confiscation. And if we speak about the legal arguments, international lawyers prove that the confiscation can be done as the countermeasure. Countermeasure, that's the actions of either the victims or the third parties who are also felt some damages from the illegal activities of an aggressor, that are aimed at motivating the aggressor to stop their illegal actions and violations of the international law. So this freezing of the $300 billion in the first days of the full-scale war, it was countermeasure back then. And it was a relatively proportionate countermeasure, because Russia hasn't inflicted very high losses back then like they are having now. According to the latest assessment of the World Bank, the damages of the 2 years of the full-scale war, and we are talking only about the full-scale war. We are not talking about the 10 years of the Russian aggression since 2014. So 2 years of the full-scale war inflicted at Ukraine $486 billion damages, meaning that it's absolutely logical when everybody is demanding that the countermeasure should be toughened. And the next step after freezing, of course, would be to confiscate this money and send it to Ukraine. You're also absolutely right that the message and the signal for the third countries was already sent 2 years ago. And those who wished to get their assets and transfer them into other more safe places, they had plenty of time to do this. But the problem, which is very often not said, explained, discussed by the opponents of the confiscation, is that in case if confiscation is done by G7 countries and European Union jointly, there are simply not many destinations for the assets to flock away, because Chinese yuan is not a sufficient reserve currency, because it is not fully convertible, plus Chinese investment market is actually not safe. They have plenty of cases of interference of the government in the investment markets. Where else can these assets go? Into Indian rupee. I mean, it's not convertible also. Into some Middle East currencies, well, they do not have, the capacity to absorb as much of the assets, plus they also have this convertibility issues. Somebody speaks about the potential currency of BRICS Union. But do you really think that, let's say, China and India can come up with one joint currency when they are having very different geopolitical goals? Of course, no. So in case if the confiscation is done jointly, there is simply not many options at all for the currencies to flock away, meaning that the fears are very often largely overinflated.
And of course, if you don't want your state reserves to be confiscated, just don't start a genocidal war of aggression. It's so easy. I don't think that countries, for example, inside of the European Union or democratic countries would seriously have fear that their assets will be confiscated by Belgium or by Germany or by the US just because they have like some political discussions or disputes. But speaking about the perspective of this action, where do we stay now? The discussion is already on the table since months, and it is not a taboo topic anymore. But what should be the next steps to make this happen?
So currently there are actually 2 tracks of discussion. One is within G7, and there they try to discuss full confiscation. We have how the debates are going on there. We have the US, Canada, and UK that are in favor of full confiscation. And we have European part of G7 countries, France, Germany, and Italy, and Japan, who are more cautious with regards to how this has to be done. Simultaneously, we have parallel track, which is European Union, and it is focused on the windfall profits. They passed the decision in February to put aside on a separate account all windfall profits. By windfall profits, I mean actually interests on the frozen assets. Why they are called windfall? Because they would never appear if there was no Russian full-scale aggression and if there were no sanctions related to the Russian full-scale aggression, meaning that this money in the normal circumstances would not be generated. So there is the decision of the European Council that those windfall profits would be put on a separate account from 2024 and further on.
But this money is not that big. Like, we are talking about a very small part of the whole sum, don't we?
Absolutely. We are talking about 4 up to 5 maximum billion euros per year. So it's not that this money, would be seriously life-saving, but it's much better, of course, to have them than not to have. And here it is also very important to mention that to get this money finally sent to Ukraine, European Union has to make additional decision that this money would not only be set apart, but actually transferred to Ukraine. Why this decision wasn't made kind of together with the previous one, I have no idea, because for me it goes without saying. If you put the profits on the frozen money aside, of course, those profits need to be transferred to Ukraine. But very important thing that it regards only the profits from 2024 and further. And we still have profits for 2022 and 2023. And here we speak about a little bit more than 5 billion euro. So in the light of Ukraine desperately needing money already today, this money is kept by Euroclear, this Belgian depository, with the decision of the Belgian government as the reserve for some hypothetical future risks. And we are talking to Belgian authorities, we are talking to the governance, to the Euro Commission, to the European Council, EU member states, that why should 5 billion euros stay within Belgian Euroclear when Ukrainians are dying already now? Just 2 days ago, Russia killed 12 people in Odessa, including 5 kids, including, 2 babies, 1 toddler, and 2 a bit older kids. I mean, Ukraine desperately needs every dollar and every euro already today. And we have this 5 billion euro, which will stay with Belgium for some hypothetical risks. What if Russia goes to courts? What if Russia attacks, does some cyber attacks against Euroclear, whatever else? But they do not say, what are their risk assessment. And, lawyers for 5 billion euro, I mean, you can basically hire all of the lawyers of this planet. And if we speak about the trials, Euroclear is very scared of trials in Russia. But, the court, Russia is not about rule of law. Russia is not about trials. Russian courts are about issuing the rulings of whatever Kremlin wants them to rule, meaning that what is the point of spending money on the trials in Russia if the decision would anyway be whatever Kremlin wants? So this sounds ridiculous from our perspective, and we will continue demanding that this 5 billion euros windfall profits made for 2022 and 2023 should be sent to Ukraine as soon as possible to protect Ukrainians. Well, maybe some part of this money should indeed stay with Belgium, that's true, but definitely not 5 billion.
Is this decision a decision which can be taken only politically, or can Ukraine force by some legal way the Western politicians to take this decision?
No, that should be a political decision.
So we are currently talking about the lack of the political will out of some fears or some unclear character of the situation, which prevents this money, which already have been generated on a separate account, to be sent to Ukraine. We're talking to Olena Halushka, who is a co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory, and she's also a board member at the Anti-Corruption Action Center at TEC, and we are talking about confiscation of Russian sovereign assets in the sum of 300 billion US dollar. Don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel, and if you have your ideas, leave them as a comment under this video. Olena, one of the arguments against transferring money to Ukraine was all the time that we don't know how this money will be spent. And this level of money, billions of euro, they can go into wrong hands, they can be stolen, they can be misused, embezzled, etc. And you are a board member of a very respectable anti-corruption organization. Are there any reasons to believe that this money, if confiscated and transferred to Ukraine, can be used not as intended?
Well, of course not. First of all is that Ukraine doesn't actually need $300 billion simultaneously at one moment overnight, because we do not have absorption capacity to move forward with this money. So that's why we have to be getting them, by different tranches. Then it is also about how this money can be used. Because we think that very often it is being discussed and debated that this money should go for reconstruction and rebuilding. But unfortunately, the situation on the front line is that if there is no sufficient and sustainable aid for Ukraine's defense efforts, we might simply in a few years have no country to be rebuilding and to be reconstructing. So we insist that part of this money has to be invested into ramping up military production, into joint, let's say, Ukraine-German, Ukraine-US, Ukraine-French, Ukraine-UK military productions. And that would be a win-win for everybody, because that would, be the necessary investment into ramping up your Western production. It's also about your jobs. It's about filling your stocks and having capacity to fill those stocks in time. But of course, and first of all, that's about us having sufficient weaponry without the need, to apply advocacy campaigns with T-shirts, op-eds, articles, whatever, for each and every new type of weapon we have to be receiving. So with that regard, obviously, this money should not go directly to Ukraine, but can go, on the contrary, to some vehicles or funds that are located abroad. If we are talking about the macro-financial assistance, like Ukraine is currently receiving $3 billion per month, this is money which goes straight to Ukraine's budget. And from the budget, it is paid as the salaries for Ukraine teachers, healthcare employees, doctors, pensioners, etc. So you cannot embezzle money there, because this money directly goes to the Ukrainian people. In terms of reconstruction, even here we know that the vulnerability spot is public procurement for each and every reconstruction project, and we already have different ideas how to ensure that there are safeguards, that all of the procurements are transparent and absolutely accountable. So even here we also have progress to make sure that less corruption is taking place there. Moreover, we have some creative ideas which we like very much, which will also be corruption-free. For example, let's use a part of this money to buy grain and other agriculture products from Ukrainian farmers and send that through the World Food Program for free to African countries or other countries that are in need. We will have, 3 victories in one decision, because we will have the support for Ukrainian farmers who are literally planting and harvesting under the bombs. We will have easing of the tension between among European farmers. What we are seeing currently, on the Polish border is also one of the manifestations of the problem that has to be solved. But we will also have, we will convey the message of solidarity to the countries of Asia, Africa, and others, because they won't perceive confiscation as something as the West does purely for themselves or for Ukraine, and they are also indirect victims of Russia weaponizing the food and Russian global food insecurity that they are pushing, meaning that they are also entitled for the part of confiscation. So what I want to say is that if there is the political decision to make this confiscation, even for the different vehicles, for the use of this money, there can be enough of the safeguards to make sure that this money is used brilliantly. But first, confiscation decision has to take place, and it is unfortunately missing now.
Can we expect that maybe not the whole sum, not maybe these 100 billion US dollar which are being held in the Belgium depository, but some smaller amounts can be confiscated, which are being located in other countries as a first step?
Well, that is also one of the creative ideas which we are discussing with the partners, that if they aren't ready to move forward with the entire sum, let's do the burden sharing with everybody, including the Belgium, but confiscating not a full amount which they have, but a much smaller one. That would help, to assess the possible response of Russia and to see, what is their fear-mongering and what they will eventually do in the end. But that would also help to kind of assess how the markets react and everything else which partners are currently discussing as their main fears. But what we are hearing, in response is that the principle would be the same. And, if there is no decision made to take those risks and move forward, they are not ready to consider even this, intermediary step. So we are offering different solutions, but the decision to finally go and do this is not yet there.
Indeed, the whole situation reminds moving in some uncharted waters. We have not seen such a confiscation during the last decades as you have described, and now we are staying in front of the need to do it, but many politicians in the West don't know how to proceed further. Ukraine needs this money. Russia has committed crimes and must pay for them. We have their Russian money on our accounts. We need to give it to Ukraine, but many don't know how to do it and are not ready to do it. It was Olena Halushka, who is a co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory and a board member at the Anti-Corruption Action Center ATTACK. Thank you, Olena, for this interview.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
And don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel. And if you have your ideas, just write them as a comment under this video and wait for the new interviews.